It's a new era in Precision Racing League action. Out with fixed setups for its cup cars and in with open setups. It not just comes down to the driver talent, but it also comes down to the knowledge of the respective teams and organizations who take part in competition. The question's going to be, which teams will be up to the task early on, and which teams will need to go to the research labs for weeks upon weeks? We're about to find out here on the Global Sim Racing channel. We welcome you to the virtual Atlanta Motor Speedway in Hampton, Georgia for the first race of the 2020 Season 1 campaign for the Precision Racing League Cup Series. I'm Justin Prince. Alongside me in the booth tonight is iRacing Vehicle Production Associate Christian Challoner. Behind the scenes, our director Sean Ambrose, and he's using cameras provided by Dougie Beer. They called this place Hotlanta on iRacing. Let's find out why with our GSRC track guide.
Welcome to the Atlanta Motor Speedway, an iconic staple on the NASCAR Cup schedule since the doors opened back in 1960. Located roughly 20 miles south of downtown in the suburb of Hampton, Atlanta has forged out a spot in history, playing host to some of the most iconic moments in motorsports. Prior to its repave and reconfiguration, Atlanta looked more like modern-day Homestead. In the summer of 1997, Atlanta was reconfigured to that 1.54-mile quad oval it's currently at. After that switch, the NASCAR Xfinity Series and Truck Series also became regular yearly competitors at the track. But it's actually NinjaTrader that holds the track record here. The series ran regularly at Atlanta for 4 years. The surface here has certainly worn over time, giving way to its sister track in Texas as the fastest quad oval on the NASCAR schedule. Surface here has not seen any paving since construction finished in 1997. Over the years, the track has become famous for its super close photo finishes, thanks in part to a very wide exit off of turn 4 compared to both Texas and Charlotte. It allows competitors to often exit 2 and even 3 wide with room to spare, and that outside lane can get quite a run to the checkered flag. That's our look at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Enjoy the show.
Let's look at our GSRC track guide for Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now, Christian, let's talk about these cars at this track. You've had experience in the eNASCAR Coco iRacing series here. How do these cars drive, especially with the new updates that came just a couple weeks ago?
Well, I would say it's probably a lot of people's favorite mile and a half, actually. It's the one, it's generally very fun to drive around here. It's not a particularly easy track. Obviously, when it's very hot, it's very, very slick, very, very difficult. 3 and 4 is particularly difficult end of the racetrack, but 1 and 2 is kind of interesting. You can see a couple of different lines through there, and I think since these cars have now kind of got a little bit more aero push when they're following each other, we should see drivers trying to move around a bit more. At least that's my hope, and hopefully that'll also play into some strategy as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the race. But yeah, very fun racetrack, mile and a half, and yeah, a lot of people's favorites.
There's a lot to talk about when it comes to this racetrack and this season, especially with some of the changes throughout the offseason. First things first, though, we'd like to look towards your series sponsors for 2021 Season 1. First, SimMSA. They provide many consulting services from completely customizing simulators to managing teams, individual drivers, and managing complete events. SimMSA is working hard to bring communities, associations, organizations, companies, manufacturers, teams, and drivers together one place to support and promote sim racing internationally, bridging virtual and real motorsports and providing understanding in a link in a network between these two involving sim racers, real world drivers, teams, and crew members, managers, engineers, and of course, motorsports fans alike. This year's season is also sponsored by ButtKicker. ButtKicker products include incredible immersion and bring incredible realism and immersion to every game. Feel every nuance and truly put yourself in the driver's seat. What you've been missing, go to thebuttkicker.com today. And by NinjaTrader. Ready to compete against the financial markets, supporting more than 60,000 users across the globe. NinjaTrader provides award-winning trading software and brokerage services. NinjaTrader is always free to use for our advanced trading charting back testing, and trade simulation. Visit NinjaTrader.com to get started and with a risk-free trading simulator and start tracking your performance. For those who tuned in last season, the last fixed series campaign of the Cup Series of recent times, the overall season championship for 2020 Season 4 went to Bradley Hawley with 397 points after a disastrous final few weeks for Richard Regan Jr. on the campaign. Joshua Daniels came home in second on that mark, followed by James O'Brien, Regan Jr., and Robert Bisson Jr. For the overall year playoffs, meanwhile, it was Joshua Daniels who ended up taking home that title. This year is going to be very different, though, especially for the various different teams involved, Christian, when it comes to this. Many returning from that respective side of the garage are looking to try and carry momentum from there, including now called private label Team Hype, who won another team championship last season. What about Jelly Rolls Racing? They are a part of 2 organizations this season. SGE eSports, along with Car Ramrod and What About Oversized, rounded up the top 5 in 2020 Season 4. All of those organizations are back for 2021 Season 1. And speaking of the challenges these teams are going to have to face, we mentioned it early on, open setups now for this season.
Yeah, absolutely. Round 1 of 10 and a very, very different feel this time around. Obviously, used to a lot of fixed setup racing in this league, but it's big change really to open setup. It's definitely not what these guys are going to be used to, and I think we're going to see a lot of moving around throughout the field. We might see some guys that we've seen at the front of the field actually regress a bit into the midfield, and I'm hoping that we're going to see some guys go the opposite way as well. But 145 laps tonight. It's not a particularly short race around here, and with only 4 sets of tires, you've got to average about 36 laps per set of tires. That's not particularly easy, and I think we're going to see some yellows as well. So picking when you take tires is going to really be a huge thing. It can make or break the race.
Absolutely, it's going to be a tricky one tonight for these drivers to plan out the strategy. It's going to be very interesting. Keep an eye on as well on GSRC.tv for live timing and scoring for today. And that's GSRC.tv to keep up with your favorite teams and drivers. Qualifying is underway for these competitors across the racetrack. And it's a big field. 34 cars ready to make their season debuts today here, Christian. Right now, the weather conditions also are expected to get hotter as the race goes on. 102 degrees Fahrenheit is your track temp right now, just past noon Instant time.
Yeah, and it's slowly creeping up as well. As you mentioned just before we came on air, that we're actually just past noon, so it's probably going to continue to get a little bit hotter as this race goes on, and especially as we have more cars on track in the race itself as well, it's only going to make it slicker. But I think it makes it quite an interesting driving challenge. Obviously, the 1.5 mile high downforce package kind of takes a little bit of edge off this racetrack, but it's still a pretty tricky place to get around, and especially with open setup, we're going to see some cars that probably not got a great balance tonight, but I have to keep an eye out for that, and it can make the afternoon quite long if your car's not really handling the way you want it to around this place.
Richard Regan Jr. is at the top of the board at the moment in qualifying, by the way, a 29 flat, followed by Joshua Daniels, who put in 19 open races this week. 19 to catch up to the rest of the competitors. Doug Evans, James O'Brien, Ken Eneland, along with Adam Zemke, the top 6 at the moment. Bradley Hawley, one of the top drivers in practice, currently 8th in qualifying, coming across up to 6th. So many of these teams have put in a ton of speed in preparation for this race, including racing in several official races throughout the entire week.
Yeah, obviously a lot of effort goes into open setup racing. It's not to say that effort doesn't go into fixed setup racing, but obviously when you got to develop your own setup as well, then you inherently have to dedicate more time to the race and lead up to the race. And obviously Joshua Daniels has been out there doing a ton of racing this week, and it looks like it's paying off for him so far, although he is 3/4 of a tenth behind Richard Regan Jr. for that pole, so it looks like he's still not quite where he needs to be.
Yeah, some drivers separate by as much as a 1.5 seconds in practice at some point. So some of the teams going to have to play catch up, to say the very least. One of the cars wanted to look at, though, for tonight and keep an eye on is the 222. That is Connor Hall. If you recognize that name, he's ran in the Arkham R Series in the past 3 races, in fact, in the past couple of years. He also finished in the top 10 back in 2018 in the Denny Hamlin Short Track Showdown. Also races at Langley Speedway in real life. He's been lightning quick as well this week, right on par with Richard Regan Jr. throughout the day.
Yeah, and I think those two are definitely the guys that we're going to be looking out for at the front of this field. Hopefully we'll see a couple of guys come to the fore in long run pace, but really Richard Regan Jr. and Connor Hall, they've been clearly the fastest drivers in practice.
As you've seen, qualifying is now wrapped up, and the driver who will bring him to the green flag to start off 2021 Season 1 will be one Richard Regan Jr. for private label Team Hype. He'll start alongside Connor Hall, the driver who started several times in the past couple of years for Chad Bryant Racing. Joshua Daniels starts in row 2 alongside Doug Evans, with James O'Brien in row 3 alongside Ken Enelin, one of the newcomers. Crowley Holly starts alongside Adam Zepke in row 4. David Wilson Jr., Colton Lane round out the top 10.
And then in 11th, we've got Brandon Walter alongside Brandon Chatley with a pretty good qualifying there for him in 12th. Patrick Cowgill, another returnee, in 13th. Trent Dinkle, a newcomer to the season, is in 14th. Mark Kalin back there in 15th with Charles Sumner in 16th. Mike Knight, another driver that we've seen in the series quite a bit over the past year, is in 17th. And Michael Witt, another newcomer alongside him in 18th. Chad Brown and Brett Adams round out the top 20.
Robert Bisson Jr. at 29.7 in qualifying starts alongside his teammate Scotty Johnson in row 11, while Chris Neesham, one of the newcomers as well, in 23rd alongside Pat Harvey. It'll be Brett Accord in 25th with Lucas Zizkov, who's ran a ton of open races this week with a performance that was poor in qualifying at 30.326. The rest of the drivers also had struggles in qualifying, James Duke and Michelle Gagnon. The drivers who did not set times were Doyle Lawrence along with Josue Tellez, along with Jose Medina, Baron Hilton, Craig Holden, and James Dewar round out your 34 entrants. 17 rows of cars from Atlanta Motor Speedway all set to get rolling in what's expected to be an interesting season opener for these cars. Now, Christian, let's talk about the keys to victory, because obviously with the fixed races in the past, there's a one-stopper. Today, two-stopper at minimum.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I normally say this a lot, especially with this league, but it really is going to come down to tires today. 4 sets for a 145-lap race, especially when we are expecting to see some cautions. The timing of when you take those tires is going to be huge. And the other thing that I'm really intrigued to see is the effects of the aero push, and to see if that kind of drags anyone into making a short pit strategy work, because it's going to be a little bit harder now. In the past, without the aero push, it was kind of easy to cut through the field if you had new tires, whereas now, if you drop yourself further back, more cars to pass is genuinely going to be quite a bit more challenging. So I think there'll be more strategy options than we've seen, and I think we're definitely going to see a lot more field spread than we're used to seeing in this league.
It's going to be intriguing to see how these drivers fare, especially our 2 drivers on the front row. Overall, how do you feel the short run's going to fare out for these cars? Because I've seen different perspectives throughout the week. Some can go full throttle, some like to save from the get-go.
Well, it's tricky because obviously if you're in the lead, you don't really have a lot of choice, and you'll pretty much always get run over by guys behind if you try and save from the very beginning of the run, so lap 1. But you can kind of drop in, kind of sit in that top 5, and you can really save quite a bit and then be quite competitive, say after 10 to 15 laps. And I think we might see a couple of these guys try this, but realistically, I'm keeping an eye on the top 2. They've definitely looked to cut above the rest, and I think it's going to be a fight between them.
The iRacing pace car is off. A new era in the Precision Racing League Cup Series is underway from Atlanta. Richard Regan Jr. brings him to the green flag. Connor Hall to his outside.
And Hall not able to step in.
Joshua Daniels able to get the good launch on the bottom side, already up to 2nd position. And quickly, James O'Brien and company among the drivers making moves in the bottom of the racetrack early on in this one. Good launch for Regan Jr. as Daniels wants the lead now.
Yeah, I think Daniels is definitely going to try to get the head of the point, but it's not going to be a trivial matter for him. Obviously, once he gets there, the draft effect is going to keep everybody close to him, and they're going to have just as big a run back on him as he's had on them right now. So I don't think it's as simple as him just getting to the lead and staying there. I think he's going to be trying to fight it out and hoping for an early yellow.
Of note, Jose Medina missed the start. Baron Hilton started from the pit lane, is already falling back a lap in this race. But Daniels was able to get on the outside to make the move. Connor Hall going backwards with the caution flag is out. Back of the field, James Dewar involved. Also bringing the 27th place car last time by into the incident. That car being Brett Accord.
feel like that was exactly what Joshua Daniels was expecting, an early yellow, and he was just getting himself to the point so he can have a control over those restarts.
Here's a look at it. One of the main attributes throughout the week is cars getting loose, and that happened with the car in front who collected 3 or 4 more.
Yeah, we've normally seen that in the past at Atlanta. When you come off a turn 2, sometimes you get tight and you end up near the wall, and we've seen guys kind of pull themselves off it, but the car tends to unload pretty badly at that point as the banking transition kind of drops away. So it's not uncommon to see guys come down the track and have a bit of a get together on the backstretch.
That was Ganyan, who was the car who bobbled around on the bottom of the racetrack. What can you do to adjust for that as a driver now, essentially, to prevent that from happening to your open setup, to make sure your car is good around the corners without snapping loose like that off the start?
Well, I'd say the big thing with that is getting a good balance between crossweight and rear spring split. That tends to be quite a major kind of impact on dynamic crossweight and how that changes. And if you have, you can end up with a situation where the dynamic cross is swinging quite a lot on corner entry and corner exit, and that tends to be what causes those big moments you see. Either if you're getting tight, it's because you're building a lot of dynamic cross, and if you're getting loose, it's because you're having a sudden drop in it. So if you see guys spinning to the inside, then they're basically dropping dynamic cross, and if they're pushing to the wall, they're gaining it. So it's really a case of getting the spring split and the static cross to work together. And really the ideal car, I mean, these guys aren't able to see it, but the ideal car around the racetrack would have a pretty flat dynamic cross profile, and that's the best way to get the best balance. Might not necessarily net you outright the most speed, especially on a short run, but it will kind of keep your car underneath you for the long run.
I think everyone watching just started writing everything down to figure out, okay, I've got to learn this, I've got to learn this, add that to everything on the list, which includes 75,000 other things. By the way, Baron Hilton was the lucky dog on the bright side, so he's back on the lead lap. 30 cars on the lead lap now as we get ready for the restart coming up here next time by.
There's always a lot to learn when it comes to open setups, and I've tried to kind of put as much information as I'm able to put out there for the past couple of years or so. So yeah, it's always interesting to talk about. If you get me started on it, I'll probably keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I won't stop you. I won't, but still, these drivers, I'm really curious on who's able to adjust the most here. The biggest movers off that start, by the way, were Wilson Jr. along with Neeson from the back of the field. +4 for Josue Tellez as well to avoid the incident. -6 already for Doug Evans, though. After having a good qualifying run, his race pace has not gone well in the EMS machine. He's in 10th.
Yeah, and obviously we only had a couple of laps there, but really track position is quite important now with the aero push and that side of things. But well, that's actually another thing to talk about with regards to open setup. What you'll tend to find is a car that runs good up front is probably going to be pretty tight when it's in the pack, and likewise the car that's tight in the pack is not going to be very good in the pack. So you probably have to set up a little bit looser in that regard, either with a little bit of nose weight further back than you might want to, or with a little bit lower cross than you would ideally want to set up for on your own. So it's quite a challenge because obviously there's not many situations where you can really get a lot of practice running around a lot of cars, and I think that's why we saw Joshua Daniels in as many A opens as he could, because that's really the only way to dial the car in, is by doing more and more races.
Want to go signal this time by. Joshua Daniels is the control car here. Richard Regan Jr. in second. O'Brien followed by Hall, Hawley, Zepke, Wilson Jr., Walter was a part of private label Team Hype, one of its new acquisitions. Eland along with Lane, the top 10 cars now at the stripe. And keep in mind, some of the teams have various technical alliances, whether it's working with their organizations or trying to work together as groupings, essentially. To sum it up, some of the drivers was speaking with some of the drivers from Bobby Taylor's Legacy Esports, working with the Reaper Speed Lab side for the private label Team Hype cars. Keep an eye on them. Regan Jr., O'Brien, second and third. As mentioned, Walter back in 8th position. All set to get back underway. iRacing pace car dropping off this time. Joshua Daniels in control of the field. Great flags back out. And a great launch for Joshua Daniels, clear by at least a couple car lanes. O'Brien taking advantage of the better line off the restarts. The bottom line, the best line throughout the week.
Yeah, it's really difficult to get wound up on the top, and obviously you see there, generally first through fifth on the odd-numbered cars on the bottom line will get a jump on the guys on the top.
Already, Hall has been able to get to the bottom, up to third position. Regan Jr. getting freight trained here this time. Wilson Jr. still trying to get to the bottom line, does. And already O'Brien to the back bumper for the race lead. Wants to get by Joshua Daniels in the sim pit car.
You see guys wasting no time at all trying to get to the head of the line. And obviously that aero push is a big factor in that. The leader does have a definite advantage, especially further into a run. And this is really where Joshua Daniels needs to try and hold on as best he can.
And now O'Brien stuck on the top line, as now Hall up to second spot. Third spot goes to Regan Jr. What a good start when it's come to the play for Joshua Daniels. But the thing is this going to last? Especially as the tires wear out, it's going to be the biggest question, I think, on everyone's minds.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're going to have to watch out for. He's got quite a ferocious amount of short run speed, it has to be said. He's pulling away from the pack right now, and you don't tend to see that if the car's got a lot of downforce in it, because that's the big thing. Everybody right now is probably at least very close to being wide open, as we see Richard Regan Jr. trying to get to the outside of Connor Hall, not able to do it. Hall kind of slowing him up in the center there. Hall looking a little bit tighter than he might want to be in the middle of the corner.
Yeah, I've raced against him throughout the week, Christian, for personal reference sake, and he's been someone who gets better as the race goes on and the run goes on. Really patient early, but can pull you later on. Regan Jr., his car can be good in the first 20 laps, but could tighten up later on. For reference sake, it's to the point Regan Jr. knows this. He wants the inside now, to the inside for second, takes it away.
Yeah, Hall definitely playing for the longer run here, which I think is an interesting strategy. Obviously, we saw that very early yellow, but still, track position, it really does matter. And I think if he goes too far back, he's got a lot of cars in a line right now. He's struggling to get back in. Nearly made contact with James O'Brien there, and now he's got Bradley Holly underneath him as well.
Several cars in the mid-pack as well, trying to sort themselves out. Bradley Holly, as you mentioned, up to fifth. Good launch for Walter as well, since that green flag on the restart. Already back up to 8th position. Hall still stuck on the top line now as a result of that bottom line being peeled open by the Team Hype cars.
Yeah, and Hall just stuck on that top side, although they are starting to spread out a little bit at this point.
Eventually, though, you'd have to think that things are going to spread out even more so, because the trends throughout the week is you get little packs of cars potentially, but the dirty air can really cause the cars to separate past lap 20.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the thing. When everybody's lifting, then that's when the dirty air really comes into play, and you've got to be really patient trying to work your way up to the car ahead of you. I've personally found that you can kind of get trapped a certain distance back where you can't really get much closer without a mistake from the car ahead of you, but at the same time, they'll also pull you along. So it can be a bit of a weird experience, because you almost feel like you can't go anywhere, and you have to be really perfect to just slowly close that gap down. And then eventually, if you can get to the spoiler, then you have a chance. But it's a slow process to get there, and this is where I think that we'll have some interesting tactical battles when it comes to drivers making decisions on whether they want a short or long pit. Because right now, Joshua Daniels, he is in the lead, but Richard Regan Jr. does look faster right now and is starting to run him down just a little bit.
The time was actually quicker for Daniels last time by. The quickest car was Bradley Holly with a 30.4. Of note, the 31 car, Patrick Calgill for Whataback, ended up getting loose off of turn 2 last time by. Went from the 20s to the very back of the field as a result of that mistake. Brett Accord has also had to come down the pit lane from the 30s. He had been involved in that early incident in this race. So several drivers with some problems. Here's another thought to think about. Overheating, Christian. Several of the drivers have already started clutching and coasting in the middle of the pack because of how much tape they can pile on. Some, depending on your gears, can go more than 50% on the tape.
Yeah, that's the thing. I always used to run as long a gear as possible so I could stack as much tape on as possible. It did hurt you a little bit on restarts, but I always found it was just better overall, because the more tape was just more efficient aero, and it was kind of free speed, to be honest with you. And I'd actually be surprised if anybody is running the shorter gear here, because that's definitely going to be hurting you.
Yeah, Connor Hall is one of the drivers. Been hearing clutch and coasting, for example, on the racetrack. Currently 31 are running on said track at the moment. Currently approaching lap 20 on lap 17 at the moment. Currently a majority of the field has single filed out across the circuit at the moment. Currently, Regan Jr. has lost 7/10 of a second to the back end of Joshua Daniels, who continues to turn lap times a tenth quicker than anyone else on the racetrack. As to second goes James O'Brien up the inside in turn 1.
Yeah, I'm really surprised actually that Regan Jr. started full back, because for a moment it looked like he was starting to move forwards on Joshua Daniels. But as you mentioned, he actually never really was gaining. He was holding station more than gaining, and now he's starting to regress back. And Bradley Holly's now underneath him, trying to take that third spot away. But Holly gets tight. Regan Jr. able to hold on to that spot for now.
Yeah, able to defend Holly, who tried to dive up the inside. And you can squeeze down in from the middle line. And we've seen Regan Jr. do that in the past and do it fairly well. There's a reason he was a 3-time champion in 2020 for the PRL Cup Series.
Yeah, absolutely. And I especially think that through 1 and 2, there's a couple of different lines. 3 and 4, pretty much always you want to be on the white line. If you're washing up off it, you're going to struggle with exit speed. But it's interesting to see the differences with the open setup and where everybody's cars are strong and weak, because there's some guys who are really, really charging the entry, but then they're having to park the center, and then there's others that are actually rolling through the center pretty good, but they just can't get off the corner. And Richard Regan Jr. looks like one of those. He's really tight coming off a 2, and now he's vulnerable to Holly.
Holly's still within a tenth of a second back, and one of the air drivers to think about too is, remember that botched qualifying run we talked about for Professor Nifty, also known as Luka Zivkov. He's up to 15 plus 11 on the race. And let's talk about that a little bit, because you say you have a fast car going through the field, it can be difficult to get up to the front unless you have the full race playout green.
Yeah, very, very difficult to move forward, and obviously up 11 spots in such a short amount of time, that's a really good gain for him. And the thing is, the field is still relatively tightly packed at this point. He's only 4.5 seconds off the lead, so he's not out of this yet. If he can get a couple more spots, he can get into the back end of the top 10 and get another yellow to swing it in his direction. I think we need to keep an eye on Luka. He looks pretty fast right now.
So is Connor Hall. He's up towards the battle for 4th position. Has got it underneath Bradley Holly off of turn 2, able to take it away. As Zivkov among the drivers who are just trying to get to the inside of the cars in front of him. It's also going to be tricky to make sure you are aware of your surroundings, because some drivers do have the tendency of having trouble exiting to the wall. And near 2-3 wide, that was with lap traffic. Near contact as Zivkov got bunched up behind several cars, although Connor Hall at the front has moved up to 3rd.
Yeah, that really hurt Zivkov there. He had a huge moment coming out to the front stretch. He's lost all the momentum that he had, and he's gone back to 19th already, looking like he might drop back to 20th here. Scotty Johnson already way up the road.
No damage, though, on the number 8 machine. As we take a look at Bradley Holly, lost 2 positions in that kerfluffle. Now looking to gain one of them back here. Regan Jr. not looking fairly good to start off. Looking almost a little bit on the tight side, as we talked about, to the point where it's really starting to cause him to struggle a little bit compared to his teammate, James O'Brien.
Yeah, and you can see it most clearly off the exit at 2. You can see Holly behind him is almost a half car to a full car lower on exit, and that's allowing him to close up. And the thing is, it is open setup, so you can kind of adjust that out of the car. But at the same time, the driver has to be aware of it too, and the driver has to start trying to compensate for it. And if you kind of buy into the fact that the car is tight and you just keep pushing it, it only makes the situation worse. So really, Regan Jr. needs to just wind it back a little bit and get himself in a good rhythm and try and get the balance back in that car.
Battle for the race lead. James O'Brien dives the inside of Joshua Daniels, just took it away and easily. And that's what I was talking about a little bit. Daniels was falling off, and Connor Hall is now closing in quickly. Reeling him in by about half a tenth to a tenth a lap now.
Now Hall is flying at this point, but it'll be interesting to see if O'Brien can get away whilst Joshua Daniels is still close to him. If Daniels has got anything to get back by, or even just slow him down so that Hall can get there and get in this fight and make it a 3-car battle for the lead. That'll really hurt O'Brien's chance of getting away from Hall.
You can see he's trying to back it up a little bit more as well in the corner. For the entry at least to get the run on the corner exit, paint that white line. The others are struggling to do that early on. And he mentioned being able to adjust a bit in the pits. This is one of the main difficult parts with a lengthy race such as this is. Normally in, say, an A Open, for some of these drivers, they could say, you know what, I can pit at lap 55, short fuel the car, maybe adjust a little bit, make it lighter, be able to make it looser. It's not quite as simple tonight.
Yeah, that is a problem. They're kind of locked in because they've got to average at least 36 laps on each set of tires. So they're a little bit restricted on options, actually. And to be honest, knowing that coming into the event would or at least should have forced drivers into building longer on cars. Because if you know that you have to average that long on a set of tires, okay, short run's important, but you literally have no choice but to run that many laps on a set of tires. So it's no good having a car that falls apart after 20 laps.
And right now, Hall is looking like he's the best long-run car up at the front of the field. The fastest lap went to Josue Tellez in the back of the field last time by, but he was quicker than the leaders by a couple 100ths. And now this is the tricky part. Once you get to around here, if you have the better car on corner exit in turn 2, you can make the pass like this. If you struggle off the corner with the aero push, you could push up like Daniels did. Hall up to second.
Yeah, a more difficult pass than it looked right there. Obviously, Daniels was on the outside and kind of could have squeezed Hall a little bit, checked him up, slowed him in the center, and made it really, really difficult for Hall to get by. Didn't look like he really elected to do that. Looks like he's happy to just run in third right now. And I would say the 77 looks like it's a pretty strong car on say, a 15 to 20 lap run, and then it looks like O'Brien in the 9 and definitely Hall in the 222 is definitely the guys that we've got to look out for on the longer runs.
100%. Already 30 laps into the action, 115 laps to go. Among some of the air battles starting to heat up is around 15th position. Keep in mind as the lead group has calmed down for the moment. You also have the train for 4th on back. You also have a train for 7th on back. Here's the look of the 15th on back train. This is where Zipkov is also once again back on the prowl.
Fighting with Brad Adams in that 23 car. Adams looks like he's struggling just a little bit. He has made some progress, but not really as much as he would have liked, and currently 7.5 seconds off the lead.
That's Scotty Johnson, as mentioned, up in front of him. Scotty Johnson's really improved from what was seen throughout the week in preparation for this race. His car looking like it's gaining a lot of speed, so is Robert Bisson Jr. Both of those drivers had some rough moments in their preparation in some of the A Opens this week on pace.
Yeah, and Bisson Jr., a driver that we saw was extremely strong towards the latter half of last year, and especially the final season. He was extremely strong, picked up that win at Homestead. Didn't have a great qualifying here, started 21st, but he is up in 12th now, slowly picking his way forwards. But I do think this has been a little bit of a change for him, going from the fixed to the open setup.
Now this race he's done much better compared to some of the other ones throughout the week. Right now the pace has settled into 31.5 throughout the majority of the pack, which is right on the money, and it's helping a little bit that these drivers, they're still their first sets, but also the track is getting hotter as the race goes on. And I'm not just talking about the battle for the lead starting to heat up a little bit again with Connor Hall closing. Up to 106 degrees Fahrenheit. That is around the highest it's been throughout the week in official racing.
Yeah, and it's continuing to creep up. Obviously, just around about 100 right around the time of qualifying. So it is moving up, and still obviously a long way to go as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that up to about 110, maybe even 112 by the end of this race.
It's a good time as any to talk about some of the different new teams coming into play and some of the rearrangements and realignments throughout the season and off-season preparation for all this. Connor Hall's teammate James Dewar, as mentioned, has not had a good night. He's already off the racetrack with Doyle Grants along with Brett Accord among your DNFs so far. But for Connor Hall, he's done a great job competing up towards the front for this race. He's also been able to hold back some of the Whataback racing cars. in the Whataback Racing Black and Orange stables this evening. So some great speed shown by several different cars, including Hall and his new team for this series. Currently the gap between first and second part in...
I was just gonna say right now, Hall just kind of stalking O'Brien at the front here. Doesn't look like he's too keen on trying to actually get the lead. Which is a little bit surprising. I would have thought that at this point he really would have wanted to get ahead of him and try and just get that gap built up before he makes that first pit stop.
But that's easier said than done right with the dirty air.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. He might have waited just a little bit too long here to kind of get by him, and now he's really struggling. You can see him trying to cross over some different lines a little bit higher there through 1 and 2, and then cutting underneath on the exit. And 3 and 4 running pretty much directly behind him as the yellow comes out.
And it's James Duke in the 76 from 22nd position who brings us back in our yellow for the second time tonight. And this one could be an interesting one because from here, it could be a one-stopper on the gas as he nearly smacks the pace car.
Yeah, pace car was really moving there out of pit lane.
You can see one of the rescue racing cars underneath, and wow.
Yeah, it looked like he was struggling to hold on to his own car there a little bit there. You can see him kind of moving around as they got down to turn 1, almost hit the wall on entry. And this is something that we see at Atlanta, actually. Front stretch is not always the easiest place. He just avoided the outside wall, but unfortunately, I think he got into Hilton there.
Yeah, that's Baron Hilton was about to say. And now, first set of tires expected to be used now from the race leaders. They are all coming into the pit lane. And now this gets intriguing because the max amount of fuel some drivers have been able to go, depending on the gears, Christian, has been anywhere from 62 as high as 67 laps here in Atlanta. You can go for a one-stop from here.
Yeah, and I think that's really the only play that anybody has. It would have just not worked at all for anybody to stay out and try and save a set of tires there. It's just no way that's going to work. So not surprising to see everybody coming down onto pit road, but I do think we're going to see a lot of drivers kind of fire off a little bit slow for this next run, knowing that they have to now realistically get to the end of this race on only one more stop.
Race off pit road, O'Brien, Hall, Daniels, Wilson Jr., Regan Jr., Hawley, the top 6.
Felt like we had a bit of a debate there as to who wanted to get out of pit road in that top 5. Nobody wanted to be on the outside.
And one thing to think about too is the tire temperatures for these drivers in open setup competition. They can get hot. Well, how hot is too hot if you are a driver, let's say, who is trying to figure out open setups and sees, oh, hey, my right front tire was at 350 degrees. Is that bad?
Okay, so this is an interesting one. I know that a lot of drivers out there have this idea that there's certain switch points in the tire and that those are kind of, once you're over X temperature, you never want to be any higher than that. That's always bad. And it doesn't quite work that way, I will say that. So it's really a case of if you can run your tires cooler than the guys around you, then you're gonna have more performance. That's simply what it comes down to. A lot of the drop off here is related to you heating the tire up, and essentially what's going on is there's no, because you got the fenders and everything, you don't really have enough cooling to keep the tire itself actually cool. So it's always going to build. It will equalize that, and that's kind of when you tend to see the lap time stabilize. But at that point, that's normally where the wear implications kind of take over, and you start to lose pace that way. So the big thing is, if you can run the same pace but run your tires, say 10, 15 Fahrenheit cooler, you should absolutely do that. That's going to pay off. It might not pay off in the immediate, might not even pay off in practice runs, but I can promise you that if you run your tires cooler but go the same speed, then it's going to pay off in race situations. So that would be my advice.
I couldn't have said it any better, Christian, to say the very least. And you're talking specifically for the curve, essentially the performance curve, where if you've seen that graphic in, say, textbooks, like Speed Secrets, for example, from Ross Bentley, that's a good example of that, where there's a certain temperature where it just dips off a cliff. And there's also, though, there's a peak around that time, where it was published, it was around 270. So these drivers are figuring a lot of that out as time goes on here. Coming up to 104 to go when the green flag flies. 1 to go.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of there's a lot of knowledge to be built up, especially if you're kind of just getting into open setup racing for the first time. And the place to start is definitely the tires. You can actually do it either way around, to be honest, with this kind of car, because the aerodynamics are pretty important. Yeah, having good control of the aero platform, aero trim. Obviously, you don't have any options other than absolute ride heights and rake and that side of things, but it really does make a big difference. And especially we tend to see cars that are very, very fast on a short run tend to be running quite a lot less rake, so they've got a lot more straight line speed. But the downside of that is that they've also got quite a bit less downforce as well. So you tend to see those guys start to fall off at that kind of point where you have to start lifting significantly, and that's when the guys who've got more rake and more downforce in the car tend to move forward. So you can work it from the downforce side or the tire side. Whichever way you do it is a good way to start.
James O'Brien with a good start on his own. Connor Hall already with a good launch to second. Green flags up back in her way. Top 4 already single filing out. David Wilson Jr. though stuck on the top line off this launch. Several cars already lined up to pass him in the 39.
Yeah, and I'm really surprised that he stayed up there. He did have an opportunity to get down, and it looked like he just didn't spot it and didn't take it. Now he's obviously stuck up on the top side, really no opening. He's got Colton Lane behind him. There's a little bit of a gap there. He might be able to get in.
And I believe he did get in. They'll use the high line as some of the drivers want to use them too to try and make some moves. O'Brien defensive line for the inside, wanting to keep the race lead. Hall trying to use the outside. Same for Bradley Hawley trying to use the outside line to pass by a couple cars. Crossover up for the front. O'Brien slipped up the racetrack. Connor Hall up to the race lead as the caution flag is out of the back of the field. It looks like Gagnon. Yes, the number 61, Michelle Gagnon, involved in the incident, and they're still wrecking as Wilson with a big checkup and nearly hit the back into several cars.
Yeah, it looked like there was a pretty strong check up there after the yellow come out in 3 and 4, and a couple of drivers nearly got into each other.
I think they did get to each other, so 2 different incidents playing out here. First, the caution flag. This is in turn 1 and 2, where there's already been contact right there that damaged the fenders on Adams's car before this happens.
Yeah, they look like they were just trying to kind of getting together on the entry, and the incident just carried all the way through the corner.
And then on the checkup under caution, Walter hit the wall hard right into Wilson Jr.'s front nose and completely destroyed his race car. So several cars getting damaged here. Let's take a look at this up top. This is after the caution came out.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what happened with Walter there. It looked like he kind of had an issue and was running up towards the wall, and then bank shot it off it. Unfortunately for Wilson, just happened to be the car that was underneath and actually righted the ship, so to speak, but significant damage for both cars there, for sure.
Wilson Jr. as a result coming in. No pit stop for Walter under this caution flag. So we re-rack him and stack him. Now, one of the main interesting things that's developed in 2020 is the rise of various esport organizations. How about this coming out earlier today? Precision Racing eSports is starting a pro driver program for the road course side, where if you have the skills and determination to compete against the best drivers, you can seize your chance now. For more information, check it out on precisionracingleague.com or on the iRacing forums. And here's the kicker. It includes a monthly base pay, performance bonuses, and many other perks. You have to have a 5,000 road I rating or higher. That is something I didn't expect to see from Precision Racing League come out today.
Yeah, that's definitely surprising for the PRL to be putting that out there, but definitely a nice incentive for anybody who is into and is successful already at the road course racing side of things. But it's getting more and more common to see teams paying their drivers in the World Championship series, and I think overall we've seen a pretty big growth in esports, and especially motorsports based esports the past year. Obviously 2020 hasn't been great for the vast majority of people, but it has actually been pretty good when it comes to the esports side of things. And it's nice to see drivers who I've seen involved in this for a very long time, who for an extremely long time were really kind of just sort of scraping by to run it as a hobby, now actually able to make it at the very least kind of part-time employment. So it's pretty cool, and definitely supportive of those kind of initiatives.
Absolutely, and there have been several teams who have been working towards that. Know several of the organizations involved with tonight have been building up to that point where they want to have it where everyone involved is to that mark. It's great to see the Precision Racing League with their esports team growing a pro driver program. We'll see how things fare out on there. But here's the interesting thing for private label team Hype's Brandon Walter is, how's that car going to respond with significant right front damage now?
Well, I'm pretty sure he's going to be down on straight line speed. That's pretty much given anytime you've got aero damage on the car. But it was just such a weird incident. Obviously, it's checking up for the yellow and everything, and sometimes you do see drivers caught out. But it's been a while since I've seen a driver kind of drive into the outside wall. So that was pretty surprising, and obviously came down the track and had further contact with Wilson Jr. as well. So I don't know the status of the left side of the car, but I imagine everybody behind him will have seen that happen, will have the idea that he's damaged and is going to be down on pace, and I don't think he's going to have many friends out there. They're all going to try and get by him pretty quickly on this restart.
Want to go signal this time by Connor Hall in control of the field this time. James O'Brien, Joshua Daniels, Bradley Hawley, Richard Regan Jr., Walter, Colton Lane, Vernon Chatley quietly up to 8th, Zemke Kalen, the current top 10, Robert Besaw Jr.'s up to 11th, Allen up to 12th, and Zivkov is up to 13th position, up 13 spots. Also up 13 spots, want to give a quick mention to is Josue Telez, who is back in PRL competition for the first time in a couple seasons. He's also up 13 positions, as mentioned, to 17th already.
A lot of drivers having some big moves up through the field, and still a long way to go, not even halfway at this point, so they can still go further forwards if they've got the pace for it.
Connor Hall over race control radio was clarifying how this restart could go for him as he looks to try and pull away from a big pack of cars that have been very tightly contested on the short run. Hall off and away, avoids tire spin. He leads them back to the green.
Yeah, I see the top line kind of stacking up a little bit. I don't think Walter got a good restart in the first place, but he's already losing ground on that top side, and that's only going to get worse. I think everybody's going to try and get around him as quickly as they can here.
Yes, indeed. You see that side by side. Brennan Shatley trying to hold on. Has the help of Nicholas Hunter on the spotter stand today. Just no hold to try and get down to the bottom of the racetrack. That's one of the things that his spotter is right now to every other driver telling him you don't have yet.
Yeah, that's it's always a bit of a misstep when your spotter's telling everybody what you're about to do over the old Teams channel, but I'm sure he's going to have somebody tell him pretty quickly that that's going on. As we see, Daniels just got checked up a little bit on the exit of 2 there, and now a 2x2 for P2.
Yes, that's up for the race lead. 2x2 for the top 5, just in front of Colton Lane and company. They've already pulled about a second or so. But Hall trying to block the runs. Joshua Daniels trying to hold off. A big run from Bradley Hawley. Regan Jr. trying to give a push to James O'Brien. Walter is still stuck in the midst of all this traffic with the damage.
Yeah, and I'm really surprised that we're seeing the guys at the front of the field pushing as hard as they are, because as we talked about, they've got a long way to go on this set of tires.
3 wide for P3 now as Regan Jr. forced up top. Daniels moves back 2 wide. Bradley Hawley really aggressive early on in this group. Well, it's just about everybody else in this pack, it seems.
Daniels trying to hold on onto the top side, but realistically it's just not going to happen. He's going to be better off trying to get in behind Hawley, and he does, because Colton Lane and Walter still hanging on with that damaged car. You can see him getting pulled down the straightaway, but he's obviously still getting the pace out of it through the corners and just able to hold on inside the top 10 right now.
See one driver trying to really use that top line. That is Mark Kalen, who's been the most improved driver throughout 2020. See how he does in 2021. Curious on how his speed is in open competition. But Lane and Whataback Racing's cars have been really good at this point of the run. Big bobble though for the 60, nearly smacked the fence off turn 2.
Yeah, and it's been a while since we've seen Lane up inside the top 5 of a race and really kind of contended for it. So he's having a really strong run right now in P6. Not got far to go to get himself into the top 5, but they're just a little bit out of his reach at this moment in time.
Battles continue to go on for the race lead now this time. Connor Hall is on the bottom. Top line, though, O'Brien with the big squeeze off the corner. And he really wants to try and flex his muscles. O'Brien has been really impressive tonight.
Yeah, and I think this is advantage O'Brien, actually, because he's going to try and pinch down. And Hall is actually really good at rolling that white line and managed to turn what looked almost like a certain loss into actually a net gain.
Still can't get quite clear yet, though, as near contact on the arc. Connor Hall trying to go higher up on the racetrack for the arc, and O'Brien gives it back to him. We go for the crossover, though. Hall goes for the block to the middle of the racetrack. O'Brien's there. O'Brien to the inside. Takes away the race lead as Hall starts to clutch and coast.
Yeah, and O'Brien able to actually just completely clear him there. And that would surprise me if Hall's clutching for the sake of temperature at this point, because he must be very, very aggressive on the tape to be running into that. And have not elected to fix it, and I can understand that. Obviously, if you're prepared to ride it out and just manage the temperatures, it can be a net gain. But it's a very high risk strategy, and obviously that's why, as the leader, it's again another advantage having that clean air that you can run in.
Connor Hall, last time by, he's seen able to make the pass back on O'Brien. And here's the thing, too. If O'Brien's in that same situation, now he's going to have to be in the situation where he manages the temps. Keep in mind, if you reach a certain mark on your water pressures as well as your oil temperatures, your engine could go kaboom at any time.
Yeah, normally struggling with oil temperatures here. Once you get to about 284 Fahrenheit, that's kind of the point where you're in the danger zone, so to speak. And it is quite difficult in open setup to figure out how much tape you can run safely. I would generally advise to try and shoot for about 265 running solo, and that'll probably be okay in a pack, as we see Joshua Daniels actually getting back into third. Regan Jr. just not really getting the pace out of the car on the long runs that he needs today.
And as you may have noticed, Connor Hall completely in the clutch right now on corner entry. Wherever he usually would lift or go maybe quarter throttle, he's been going full on clutch mode. Daniels is up to third, by the way. Regan Jr. still stuck in fourth. And it's been surprising with Regan Jr., where we were expecting him and Hall to be the front runners. Instead, it's been Hall and O'Brien who have been the two quickest cars early on.
Yeah, and we know that O'Brien and Regan Jr. obviously work closely together. This Hall has really stacked him up here. Holly's getting underneath Regan Jr. now, and the entire top 6 is really, really tight.
See that right there, as Regan Jr. with the better run, though, off the corner, able to weave a wobble to the bottom, as Lane now looking to try and jump up the lane to try and jump to the line. Regan Jr. is now clutching, coasting as well, as Daniels wants the top line.
Yeah, this is definitely not about fuel. These guys are definitely running it marginal on tape and oil temperatures, because there's no way anybody can make it to the end here without another stop. So it's definitely not fuel related, and even if it was, you wouldn't be trying to clutch in a battle like this at this point. These guys are close to detonating an engine right now.
I've been hearing in some races, Christian, keep in mind, drivers have been that the entire run. They've been so close throughout the week to the limit. Hall is now close on that limit. Daniels, though, doesn't appear to be close to that limit. He's still pushing.
On Lane, he tried to follow Holly past Regan Jr. on the outside, and he's just got into the fence on the exit of 2, and a good run is definitely going to have come to an end right there.
That's the 60. He is back to 10th position as a result, as Holly making the move. Here's the look. We'll take a quick look at the replay, as now he is going backwards and checked up several cars.
Yeah, it was a big impact with the outside wall here. You can see Holly going to the outside of Regan Jr. and Lane tries to follow him and just gets loose and just not enough space to catch it up. Gets in the wall pretty heavy with the right side, and obviously lost a lot of momentum as well, and everybody's still stacked up pretty tight.
Meanwhile, by the way, Holly is still holding on to 4th, and O'Brien's back up to 2nd again. This has been a really intriguing race where it's been difficult to judge how this could play out, but Hall is in the great position of clean air, despite the fact he's having to save the temps. Compare that to O'Brien, he's now in a situation where he's going to have to push. You also see that diamond line, Christian. That's also been where several drivers have been aiming to go that low all week, as Hall is.
Yeah, and the whole line crossing over and whatnot as well for the following car is a big deal, because you don't want to be right behind someone. You'll just have a ton of aero push there, so you do want to try and cross them over a bit, but tends to put a little bit more energy into the tires trying to be offline, and that can also go against you as well. So you can't commit to running opposing line to get a long time, especially if you're having to kind of really force the car to do it. So O'Brien's got to keep an eye on that, but I think Hall's strategy here is quite interesting and obviously marginal on the temperatures, and just focused on trying to stay out in the lead the whole time. But it seems to be quite effective right now, I have to say.
Has been indeed. Brandon Walter in a bit of trouble in the pack, hit the wall down the front straightaway. He's been shuffled to 15th position, and the damage continues to get worse as it's 3 wide behind them nearly in the checkup effect with the lap traffic.
Yeah, so it got a little bit interesting there with James Duke into turn 3 on the last lap. He was up there in the fence, not having a good run tonight, and just trying to get around there and log laps at this point.
Yeah, that could have been disastrous right there in a couple different segments, but for Walter, it is getting disastrous. He's lost all the positions he's gained since the start of the race, and the damage has seen him slower on the straightaways than anyone else around him right now by a couple miles an hour.
Yeah, and that's really the kind of the biggest disadvantage you can have out of any, to be honest. It's always the thing that I feared the most, is if you lose straight line speed through damage, it makes the racing really tough because it's so hard to pass anybody.
Of note, Joe Gagnon has come into pit. He crashed down the front back straightaway against the outside wall at one point. That was a couple laps ago. He is now done for the race. That is now our 5th DNF of the night. Make it 29 cars still running with only 2 laps down. Craig Holden, James Duke in this race. The top 4 all single file and out, but several double-digit position gainers, including a plus 19. Look who's in 7th. It's Professor Nifty.
Yeah, and he's had an up and down night at this point, but he's really managed to move his way forwards in the end. Obviously finally got himself up inside the top 10, and looks like he's still got pace to go a little bit further forward as well. Actually, might see him up in the top 5.
He's the fastest car on the racetrack by 1/10 of a second as well. He's been looking pretty sporty here in the mid-runs today.
Definitely knew he had the pace, just obviously mired in the mid-pack, and we see him right here working over the 57 of Adam Zemke. I don't think it's going to be long before he's by. He's got a good run here. He should be able to take it the inside if Zemke allows him, but just not willing to force the issue at this point. Running a little bit higher than Zemke through 1 and 2. Might have a good run on the exit here. Try and get underneath him into 3. Looks a little bit far back.
Yeah, currently about half a car length or so. Zemke not making it quite so easy, and right now Luca a little bit further back on the entry, trying to get that launch we talked about.
This is where the aero push in the track position really comes into play, because as you said, that Luca is the fastest car on track right now, but he's not able to use it all that effectively. Yes, he is making his way forwards, but it is challenging for him. He's not just cutting through the pack like it's nothing, and this is where I think there's an opportunity on this last pit stop to try and gain some track position by making that short pit strategy.
76 to go. We are approaching that fuel window in about 7 to 10 laps or so. You've seen the pass able to be completed for plus 20 for Luka Zivkov now. But talking about that undercut strategy, it's almost a fine margin now with some of the adjustments since the latest iRacing update, right? Because some drivers, they might fall like a rock if they do it. If they do it at the right time, though, Christian, they might not be able to be reached by several of the cars, can gain you 2 to 3 spots minimum.
Yeah, that's definitely the trick to it, and honestly, it's not an exact science, and it's not a particularly easy thing to make a decision on. But the goal really is the short pitting car is to hope that you drag some of the actual slower cars with you when you make that short pit strategy call, so that then when the guys who are running a long pit, they're coming out with quite a substantial number of cars between you and them, and hopefully they're their short run with their fresh tires relative to you who's been out there for a while is kind of gone by the time that they're actually close to you, and then the aero push can give you a little bit of safety net, and hopefully you can hold on. But definitely adds a couple more options, I think.
I think so too. O'Brien gaining a little bit on corner entry now in turn 1 and 2, still separated by that cushion of 2/10. They're running 31.4s to 31.5s up towards the front of the field. And looking towards the rest of the field, and this is where it gets tricky again. Say you're in the grouping of Scotty Johnson and company. That's about 2 seconds nearly behind your top 9 at the moment. Those type of packs, it can be tough to break away from them now that the pace for that group is right now in the 5s to the 7s compared to what we're seeing up at the front. It can make it tricky where, say you're in that grouping where you know you have the speed. Again, it makes you essentially locked. You see that gap starting to build up, in fact, in that pack, as Hall is trying to break up the draft on O'Brien down the straights.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's obviously a frustrating thing as well. If you're in a pack and you know that you're actually faster than the guys that you're in a pack with, and you can see it's starting to break up the line, and other guys kind of pulling away, as we've seen with the lead group, it's really difficult to then run those secondary packs down. So it's a frustrating deal, but you just kind of have to get with it and understand it, and try and do your best to get out of those situations if you can. And obviously different pit strategy allows you to do that.
Keep in mind, your race leader has one of iRacing's more well-respected setup builders on the box tonight, James Mullins from Nexus eSports, as well as one of the setup shops across the iRacing service, is currently working with him on the box at the moment. And it shouldn't be surprised if that's now the case where you can connect the dots, because guess who beat Michael Conti by several seconds this week? James Mullins in one of the SOF races this week.
Yeah, obviously he got a good car under him tonight here, and James O'Brien's trying to take it to him, but just not quite able to do it at this point. But one thing that's really interesting, and actually something that I'm very pleasantly surprised about tonight, is with the fixed setup racing that we had the past year in this league. Obviously it was inherently very close in terms of pace, and especially at mile and a halves, where there's a reduced driver skill gap, should we say. We obviously saw a lot of close racing, but even the switch to open setup racing has not significantly spread the field out, in my opinion. I mean, at the moment we've got 5 cars all within a second and a half of the lead, so it's really nice that we can still see a bunch of close racing in this league, and we're not just seeing one guy go out there and just walk away from the field.
Yeah, they've kept them on their toes essentially tonight, especially O'Brien, especially Daniels, who's been surprisingly very quick. We talked about his preparation. Regan Jr., though, having some trouble trying to hold off the battle for 5th. To the inside line, this is Zivkov. Again, up one more position.
And Zivkov's absolutely flying at this point. He's now up inside the top 5, and Regan Jr. is just not able to get the same pace out of the car as his teammate O'Brien is tonight. And I think we'll see him come back from this in future weeks, definitely much stronger. And this is something we've seen from Regan Jr. in the past. He'll have a bad week, or even a couple of bad weeks, and then he'll bounce back, and he'll rectify his weaknesses. And I think tonight is definitely showing that he's got a couple of things to work on here.
Robert Bissaw Jr. also making his way through the field. He and Scotty Johnson are now in the top 10 in 2 of the SG eSports cars. So right now, Regan Jr. is really not looking too well right now at this point. He might need to make a massive swing in the pit boxes to have any sort of shot. Keep in mind, Pat Harvey, their 3rd driver, is in 13th, who has also gained several positions.
Yeah, and that's also a difficult decision to make as well, because obviously you can see yourself falling backwards, and then you know you have to make a change. You have to do something to try and stop the bleed. But at the same time, the fact that you're not where you want to be with the car means that you're also generally not very confident in what adjustments you can make, because you're already doubting yourself, because you're already out there with a car that isn't as good as you want it to be. And obviously it's kind of one of those things that you just have to kind of cut through, and you have to go, hey, it's doing this, I want it to do this, I have to try something. And you have to take a pretty big swing at it, and just I don't want to say hope for the best because it has to be well reasoned, but at the same time, you do have to be aggressive with adjustments. You can't be timid with them, especially when you're in a situation like Regan Jr. is right now, where he's just falling backwards. He needs to do something.
And keep in mind, I was talking with Boyd Hogan, one of the people over at Bobby Dillon's Legacy eSports about this. He expected Regan Jr. to win this race today. I don't think he was expecting this. Keep in mind, Hall is starting to push the pace now on O'Brien. We've been hearing he's been saving tires up at the front of the field, and guess what? That's now seen him push on forward for the rest of the pack. Trouble Jose Torres, he's elected to come into pit, I believe, after he had a massive slide into the grass.
And he might just be able to make it to the end from here.
Let's see to make sure of that, to see the exact case. He has a rear end pit box, and yes, I believe he actually hit the commitment cone here, you'll see.
He's coming through 3 and 4. He actually does it like he's trying to get down. He's on the apron. Just coming in too hot. Wipes the cone out completely.
Like I said, he went to the grass. And that's a penalty for obvious reasons. So the unsafe pit entry and the excessive speeding, that is a 1-lap penalty minimum for Jose Torres, which, by the way, in Atlanta has been a common thread.
Yeah, it's always a tricky one to get slowed down for. It comes up on you, and it's quite a tight pull away from the track as well. And everybody always kind of ends up looking like they're coming in hotter than they expect to be. And that right there is a pretty good example why you will always lose more trying to push the pit entry than you will gain. So it's always better to be conservative, especially when it's the first green flag pit stop that you've done in the race.
You see Holly and Daniels now having the lap traffic come into play. Holly making the pass on the outside. Daniels has fallen off 2 seconds in the past 5 laps. So there's that short run, looks like it's starting to come into play to where it's now hurting him the long run here. They are already 46 laps into the tires.
Yeah, and Hall right now is just so fast at this point. He was 4/10 quicker than O'Brien the last time by.
Yeah, it has been incredible to see Hall in this race. Zivkov also still closing in on all this here. He's in 6th position. Bisson Jr. is now up to 5th, by the way. And whatever SG eSports did in the past day or two, they've completely turned around what it was looking like throughout the week. Keep hitting upon this, but they were a full second off throughout some of the races from what I personally see, Christian. They have improved a ton tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to mention it before you picked up on it. I saw the switch around whilst we were looking at that pit road incident. The 3 just sneaking by the 8 of Zivkov, and that's really impressive to see. Bisson Jr. who obviously come from the back, the same as Zivkov, and he's not done yet. Right now, it looks like Lucas is kind of stalling out ahead of the 46 of Regan Jr., but the 3 of Bisson Jr. is not stalling out. He's still going. He's catching the back of the 77 right now, and I think he's got a chance to get by him before they pit.
Yeah, he's actually quicker than Bradley Holly as well. Could be in line for a potential top 3 at the current rate that Bisson Jr. is going. Right now, the teammates for him, Scotty Johnson's up to 8th. Pat Harvey is still stuck in 12th, 10 seconds back of your race leader. By the way, Connor Hall, since we mentioned the potential save and the man on the box, has pulled nearly 3 seconds in the span of 8 laps. So that says something, to say the very least, that they were definitely saving a ton.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised they waited that long to kind of pull the trigger on that run, if they've got that much pace in hand.
Doug Evans has pit this time by for his scheduled stop. We are in the range where drivers are known to pit throughout the week. Drivers have tried to stretch it a decent amount as we take a look at your race leader, now up 3 seconds. With this big of a gap and it growing more so, when do you pit now if you're Connor Hall?
I think you just shadow everybody else, to be honest. You've got enough where you'll still come out ahead if you go 1 lap later than everybody else, and that'll give you an inherent tire advantage, and already up to 3.1 seconds now. I think we'll see the majority of the field will start to come down around about lap 95. I would expect we'll see Hall stay out, maybe even stay out to 100. because he's just got so much in hand. There's realistically no reason for him not to take advantage of the long run pace he has and then kind of double down on it by overcutting everybody, so to speak, on the tires. Even if he comes out behind, he's going to be so much faster at the end of the race if it stays green.
Absolutely. By the way, Doug Evans, we mentioned him pit. He also got clipped for speeding on his pit entry. Lost himself a lap as a result. There's now 25 cars on the lead lap as a result. And that's also going to be the tricky part, right, is say you're in a pack, you're going to need to have some space, likely to duck down to the pit lane, because while some may, yes, use the apron, the best way has always been charge it off of towards turn 4 and then arc it on down to the pit lane.
Yeah, but you've got to be really careful with it, because if you're not able to hold it down on the arc, then you'll end up with the issue that we've seen a couple of times already tonight, where you just wash out, take out the cone.
Right, and Chatley now into the pit lane this time by. So that is a scheduled stop for one of the Rescue Racing cars. This time in this season, rather, their drivers representing Whataback Racing. Of course, you see some of the logos, they're coming out, having a charity race coming up, in fact, with Rescue Racing at Michigan. And in fact, it's going to be on GSRC, Christian.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to see. Always good to see guys running those charity races, and they're pretty fun races to be a part of as well, actually, because you know you're obviously running it for a good cause, and at the same time, everybody's kind of really got no dog in the fight, so to speak. There's no championship or anything. Everybody's just there for a good time.
And here's the thing, they support dogs as well, and various animals. There's a reason they're called Rescue Racing.
I was trying to sneak that in there, and I think I did that quite successfully.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So we'll see how that works out for them. 52 to go, and you can see the massive difference in speed. The fall off for tonight, 1.6 to 2 seconds.
Yeah, it's really extreme. Obviously, this track's always been pretty big in terms of fall off. A little bit less so now with this higher downforce package than we've seen in the more recent past, so to speak. As we see the 31 car trying to let the 77 of Joshua Daniels go there on the entry to 3 and actually getting in the wall himself, able to keep it straight, so no caution.
Of note, by the way, you see Bisot Jr. closing in on Holly. And these are the battles that I'm keeping an eye on the most, as well as that battle you see Regan Jr. and Daniels behind, because the timing of their pit stop's going to determine who gets that spot at the end of the race, even if it is the 1 to 2 lap difference.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me as well is that we've got Zivkov there behind them, and Regan Jr.'s actually repassed Luca there, and that's something I wasn't expecting to see, because Luca really zoomed up on him and got by them, and now Regan Jr. is having a little bit of a resurgence in pace. Still not where he'd want to be, but definitely quicker than he's looked for a little bit so far.
Following drivers have come into pit this time: Adam Zemke, Ken Enelin, along with Brett Adams, Baron Hilton, all in for scheduled stops. Of note, Zemke was from the top 10, rest of the drivers from the mid-pack, so they're starting to come in for those spots. And here's the thing. For these cars, they will have to start cycling through cleanly with some of the drivers on old tires. And that can also be very nerve-wracking as competitors.
Yeah, and that's where the risk comes in with the short pit strategy, because you're relying on getting the track position and getting the gap built up when you have those fresher tires whilst your competitors are out there on their old tires. But at the same time, you need to be able to use that, and obviously if you've got a lot of cars out there with old tires, you can't just run through them. You're going to have to check up. You're going to have to work your way through them as quickly as you can. And if you kind of get hung up too many times, you lose all the potential advantage you can build. And that's the big risk with the short run the short pit strategy.
100%. Bradley Hawley, the multiple-time champion, now looking a little bit tight. And for Bisot Jr., we've seen him at the end of last year really impress some people, especially with him breaking into victory lane, Christian, to move into the championship 4 for the playoff race. And now he's moved into the podium positions here if he can complete this pass on Bradley Hall.
Yeah, we see him looking underneath on the exit of 2. It's going to be a little bit difficult to out-drag Hawley on the entry to 3, but he might, nope, he's going to have to fall in behind. Hawley's still running the top side, though, so advantage to Bissell Jr. here if he can run the bottom.
Charles Sumner's pit this time by near contact. The battle now for third. And the driver with fresher tires, Doug Evans, that car you see back there, has been very patient, letting these cars control their own fight. Looking like Evans pushing a little bit more on the entry, a little bit more impatient as this is continuing now for 2 to 3 laps. Bissell Jr. finally let go.
Yeah, and that right there is a great example of what can happen to really mess up your short pit strategy. If you come up against two guys who are fighting like that side by side, then it just kills you. You lose all the pace advantage that you would have, and it flips the switch the exact opposite way to where you'd want it.
And Bradley Hawley's in, and that's Mark Kalin who sped into the pit lane likely, while another car missed their pit box by at least 3 stalls. Believe that may have been Craig Holden. Let's take a look at what happened to Kalin as he really locked up the tires, trying to keep it inside the cone.
Yeah, I'll be well impressed if he wasn't speeding here, but still, it was a pretty good display of car control to actually avoid the pit cone here. You see, he's definitely a little bit hot. It's wiggling around on him. Just misses going into the grass, and he'll be lucky if he wasn't speeding. I think he might be okay.
Here's the crazy part. Bradley Hawley got booked for speeding. Mark Kalin did not. So Mark Kalin able to control the car to be able to get it down by the end of the first timing segment. But now Hawley forced to serve a penalty of more than 40 seconds in the pit lane. Brandon Walter, 33 seconds in the lane. Scotty Johnson, Robert Bissell Jr. also having to serve penalties. Regan Jr. also ended up having some trouble now in his sequence. He's on the racetrack. He's now had an incident, it appears, in the 46 where he's got significant damage with the lap traffic with a car that was on fresher tires in Chatley, all while Hall was in.
Well, I expected to see some excitement in the pit cycle, but I wasn't quite expecting this, and even Connor Hall wasn't able to avoid making a mistake himself. He didn't speed on entry, but he did miss the box and have to back up. Thankfully, he had that big lead, and I don't think it's going to hurt him because everybody around him made bigger mistakes.
So Regan Jr.'s strategy may have just gone up in smoke because Hall, for one, is coming out a decent amount ahead of Regan Jr. as a result of contact with Brendan Chatley in turn 1 last time by. The second thing is going to be everyone who was around him, who was in relative pace, was booked for speeding just about. What an unbelievable sequence. Take a look at this.
Yeah, and you see there, Regan Jr. just, I don't think he realized the 59 was underneath him and started turning to the corner, and that's going to hurt. There's damage to both sides of the car right there.
Yeah, that car is demolished, likely in speed.
And here he is.
Yes, indeed. Off and away, and he goes into the pit stall. So a rough race for Regan Jr., as that's going to cost him at least a few seconds minimum, as well as in terms of overall speed with 40 to go.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we see him park this year. Oh, he's actually going back out.
I mean, it's the first race of the season. You don't want your first drop and your only drop to be race 1.
It's definitely true, but I really thought he might take some of the repairs there. It's pretty significant damage to the car.
He took 14.4. So the race leader, though, is David Wilson Jr. He is yet to pit a 9-second buffer. He's up to 61, coming up to 62 laps. Everybody else has pit. And here's the interesting mark. Half the field has been booked for speeding in this race, give or take. Walter, Hawley, Bissell Jr., Evans, Dinkle and company.
That's a pretty wild stat right there.
By the way, Brendan Chatley on the massive undercut has been passed by O'Brien, Zepke, and potentially could be caught up by a couple more cars in a little bit. Next car up is Mark Kalin.
Kalin actually running in 7th spot right now. 6th spot even as he crosses the line, gains another position. So Kalin having a pretty strong run here. Didn't speed in pit road. It instantly gets himself deep into the top 10.
Taking a look back towards Zepke and Chatley. Zepke on much fresher tires, and they'll cycle in their position up because David Wilson Jr. is in for his scheduled stop. Hall is now back in the race lead. by only 7/10 of a second. And with the fresher tires, though, compared to James O'Brien.
Yeah, so he has 1 lap fresher tires, and I think that pretty much accounts for that difference evaporating, so to speak, between Hall and O'Brien. But at the same time, Hall's pit lane time, not Colton lane time, was about 3 seconds longer than James O'Brien. So that would have been where he missed the pit box and had to back up.
And before Colton Lane makes a button saying, it's Colton Lane time. He's in 10th position, by the way, with the undercut. And this is a mixed amount of strategy, Christian, where half the drivers inside the top 15 are on undercut calls of 16 to 10 laps on the tires already. Others are on fresh tires now. So we're going to have massive swings in this board on the left side of the screen, potentially the next 20 laps here.
Yeah, absolutely. The entire top 10 and even down to the top 15 has been completely just flipped around. About the only guys that we haven't seen move around is Connor Hall and James O'Brien. They're still at the front of the pack. But we've got drivers out there like Adam Zamke. He made for a relatively aggressive short pit call, but not as aggressive as Brandon Chatley, who's currently running in 4th. Adam Zamke's about 6 to 7 laps older on tires compared to Hall and O'Brien, and Chatley's almost 10 laps older, so he's a very aggressive undercut. The guys I'm keeping an eye on, Mark Kalin, he's got a potential to pick himself up a top 3 here. He's on the same strategy as O'Brien, so he's got substantially fresher tires than Chatley and Zamke. And then we've also got to keep an eye on Luca. He's back there in 8th, so he's a little bit further back, but he's also got fresh tires as well.
Yes, indeed. He's in fact right now 3rd on the 4th rather on the fresh tire call. The undercut call right now is ordered Zemke, Chatley. Then you can put Sumner into that group just about at the moment. Chris Neesham was also in that group. He's been shuffled already to 9th. This is among those drivers. Ken Allen also in those drivers who undercut. Brett Adams, Pat Harvey, Richard Regan Jr. on fresher tires catching up here.
Yeah, Regan Jr. out there obviously started on the pole and back there in 14th right now, but on the lead lap, which is pretty significant because some of his inherent title rivals, so to speak, are not on the lead lap right now. Bradley Holly and Robert Biso Jr. are on 1 lap down. The last car's 1 lap down though, so they've got some work to do if they want to be in contention for the Lucky Dog spot.
Yes, indeed. Big mistakes from some of the top competitors tonight. Chad Brown is currently in the Lucky Dog position, by the way, in 64. He's 6th, starting to heat up as well. Joshua Daniels able to pass by Charles Sumner. Zivkov also following suit. Daniels, you see there, is also a part of the undercut strategy. 14 laps, make it 15 this time on the tires.
Actually, my scoring might be wrong, but it's showing that Joshua Daniels for me is actually on the freshest tires out there. He's only been on them for 9 laps.
Give or take. Give or take. Either way, the fresh tires, they're starting to fly a little bit. The downside is he's already 50 seconds behind the race leaders.
Yeah, I don't think he's got any possibility of getting up to those front 2. I think the front 2 have kind of set sail, and that's going to stay as it is. I think realistically we've got an interesting fight for 3rd place though, between Mark Kalin, Lucas Zivkov, and Joshua Daniels. I think those guys are all on very similar strategies and all in contention for that 3rd spot. We do have Zamke and Chatley who are still in that fight right now, but with the significant tire disadvantage that they have, I expect to see them to drop back.
By the way, you see James Duke letting by O'Brien. He has fallen back more than 2 seconds now, as Connor Hall is put on the afterburners, running 0.3 of a second quicker a lap right now.
Yeah, I think there's no real reason for Hall to save tires at this point. If he can go, he might as well go.
100%, especially with clean air right now. That's exactly what he's been doing. Mark Kalin, for reference sake, he is within 1.4 seconds of Brennan Chatley and needs to close up about 5 seconds to get to Adam Zemke. And we've seen how aggressive that pit entry is. It's surprising how good he's been today in the open sets.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously very, very surprising for him to not get a speeding penalty there, but actually just did something which is quite an effective way to prevent yourself picking one up, which is if you do cross the line with a significant amount of overspeed, you can really park the car, and as long as you get it slowed down in that first segment, it's average speed of the segments. So he obviously overshot, and then he really basically brought it to a complete stop, and that's why he wasn't given a speeding penalty, whereas some of his other competitors blew through that first segment way over speed, and that's why they got the stop and hold.
He's within the draft of Chatley. And you got to give it to Chatley. A bold strategy call to try and get in positions, and it might get him a potential top 15 at minimum.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's quite a lot of merit in the strategy that he's trying to pull off here. It might be a little bit tight for him as we get towards the end of the race, but obviously he's still got substantial amount of track position. A lot of cars really, really spread out on the lead lap at this point, and even if he does fall back, there's 15 on the lead lap. It's highly likely that he's going to stay inside that top 15 group, and if a yellow comes out, even better for him. He's going to probably be set for a net gain here.
Indeed. Joshua Daniels, by the way, is now in the battle going on with Zivkov, and this is where the tires are starting to go off with Bradley Hawley in front. Hawley, as mentioned, 1 lap down. He is nearly at the tail end of 1 lap down, in fact, at the moment. Gets passed on the inside by Daniels, and that breaks up the battle just like that.
Yeah, we've got a pretty interesting line of cars here. We've got Daniels, Zivkov, and Kalen not too far ahead. They're about to catch Chatley at this point. Zemke's still got quite a nice margin. He's got about 4 seconds ahead of Chatley, so he's safe for the moment.
And the more that Kalen's stuck in the dirty air, the longer it's going to take, you have to think, especially since look at all those lap cars in front of some of these drivers. That includes Mike Knight, James Duke, Chad Brown, Brandon Walter, who are all scattered among different lines on the racetrack.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the other thing now that we've gone through a pit cycle. Everybody's spread out even more, so there's pretty much no such thing as clean track right now. There is a couple of gaps around there with maybe 2 to 3 seconds that you can slot into, but definitely nothing like what we've seen before.
Indeed. Keep in mind that several of the drivers as well looking for the damage control, as Kalen now getting reeled in again with Daniels now in the back bumper here all of a sudden.
Yeah, Kalen not been able to pass Chatley as easily as I thought he might be able to, and now looks like he's just struggling a little bit. Daniel's able to cut underneath him, probably going to get by him into turn 1 here, and he's got to be careful, Kalen that is, because Zivkov is right behind and probably going to try and sneak in underneath at the same time.
He took a bit of a peek, and I think he's going to let him try and continue that said peek off the corner. Just can't get the run, Zivkov, as now Chatley. Bit of a bobble, bit of a weave, and Daniels, a little bit tight, still able to complete the pass. He's up to 4th. Zivkov able to complete the pass on Kalen in 3.
Yeah, Zivkov actually going to get past Chatley as well, and Kalen's going to be pretty frustrated right there because he's been working on trying to get by Chatley for quite some time now, and those two just made it look pretty trivial by comparison.
And they're all in the midst of heavy dirty air in traffic right now. If they get by the next 2 cars, though, they are home free, and that can build up a big buffer for some of these competitors, to say the very least, for some of these battles. Right now, 4 cars covered under a blanket have a track behind your race leader.
Yeah, looked like a little bit of the frustration was getting to Kalen right there. He was trying to run Chatley really, really close to the fence on the exit of 2, and got into his left rear and nearly sent both of them around. This time it looks like he might have got it done with the assistance of a lapped car.
Yes, but now another lap car's diving to the inside of him. That's a teammate from Winnebago Racing diving to his inside. Bradley Hawley now making it a little bit more difficult on Kalen, and now you have to think the frustration's going to start boiling a touch.
Yeah, this has gone from looking like a potential top 3 possibility for Kalen here to, well, it's still going to be a good result no matter what, but obviously he's fallen back from guys who are actually on worse tires than he is, so that's something that he's probably not going to be too happy about.
They'll probably discuss it a little bit, or at the very least, the thought process might be Hawley's a little bit quicker, try and make him have to break through the holes for me. But right now, it's more than 3 seconds still. Daniels and Zivkov have to close up if they want to try and have a shot at a podium.
Yeah, and they do have a significant tire advantage, but they're only running about 1.75 tenths faster, so they will get there, but I don't think they're going to get there with quite as many laps as they might have expected.
Yeah, absolutely. That is Brandon Walter that they are next to lap, by the way, and Brandon Walter, it looked like a good night at the mid portion of the race, then that contact with the situation under caution, everything just snowballed from there, Christian. And it's gone to where right now Walter, he is in 17th place, as now Zivkov with a bit of a bobble underneath. Yeah,
and it's pretty easy to let a race get away from you like that, and there's actually a lot of skill in kind of stopping that from happening. And even if something does happen, you kind of got to have methods in place for kind of making a recovery and just doing some damage limitation. And unfortunately, it looks like that's really not worked out tonight for Walter in that 99 machine.
These cars are now fighting heavy. They're actually slower than Zemke. They're fighting so hard. The difference on the tires, about 8 laps, keep in mind, at the moment. 16 to go this time by. Walter watching with the popcorn out.
Yeah, and Zivkov's obviously looked very, very fast all evening long, and it's no surprise to see him trying to get past Daniels at this point, but it's hurting both of them, and realistically, they should have just stayed in line, because they were going to catch Zemke a lot quicker that way than fighting. This is the best possible situation right now for Adam Zemke, because these guys are wasting their advantage.
Here is Zemke right now coming out of turn 4. He's running 31.5s, while the battle side by side, it's 31.8s with 15 to go. At the current clip, if they're even to close up, there's not enough time now with how hard they fought, especially with some of the dirty air and some of the traffic. Zivkov now up to 4th, 22 positions, yeah.
Zivkov's finally managed to clear Daniels, but it's a huge time loss, 4.3 seconds. That's just a massive gap. It doesn't sound like a lot, but realistically, you don't gain more than at most 0.2 a lap in most oval races. So that's just a huge margin for him to run down with the short amount of time we've got left.
In a recap, Connor Hall leads by almost 7 seconds over James O'Brien. Zemke in 3rd. Here's a look at your race leader. And for him, it's been a very dominant performance tonight, especially the second half of this race.
Yeah, we've seen him just absolutely check out, especially towards the end of that first long run that we had, where it looked like he suddenly just decided he was going to actually show his hand and hold that huge gap. And I think at that point, everybody knew that the race was essentially over.
Well, we talked about it, expect him as one of the favorites. There's a reason for that. 31.6s in traffic is astoundingly quick. Right now, O'Brien's matching that in clean space, to put that in perspective. And also put this in perspective, there is a chance here, despite this fight side by side right now, for position, mind you, that is for 10th, that they can get lapped up to the top 6.
And that's definitely an impressive stat right there. It's not an easy thing to do at all, and to be able to lap up even into the top 10 is pretty impressive. To get let alone get to the back of the top 6.
That was Brett Adams, by the way, getting up to 10th spot. Chris needs him battling there in that. Next car who would be up for grabs to be lapped is 6 seconds up the road. Charles Sumner, then Pat Harvey, Brendan Chatley, Mark Kalin in that order. With 10 laps to go, Connor Hall still dominating. Mark Kalin trying to still work through some of the traffic.
Kalin actually not really pulling a big margin on Chatley, despite having almost a 10-lap tire advantage at this point.
Yeah, it looks like almost he's buzzed the tires, and that's also the major concern with the traffic. Coming up to 9 to go. This time by. Now at 9 to go.
Definitely looks like Zemke is going to be safe in that third spot. Zivkov has been trying to close the gap down, but not running significantly faster, and Joshua Daniels still with him, so to speak, but I think that battle might be over.
Yes, indeed. I'll listen into Zemke for just a lap or two here and just take a listen to some of the throttle inputs here for the 57.
Car underneath him, to be honest. I mean, through 3 and 4, like he's just a little bit tight in the center of the corner, but definitely not having to really work the wheel to get that car around the track. And I think Zemke's just done a really solid job tonight. We haven't talked a huge deal amount about him until we saw him pop up inside that top 5, but since that point, he didn't make the mistake that a lot of people did getting on a pit road. He didn't speed. He executed the pit stop, he ran his own race, he did his own strategy, and I mean, the short pit has really worked out for him. I was a little bit skeptical. I thought some guys were going to run him down. It just hasn't happened. He's been able to maintain the pace necessary, and actually he's had some really strong pace as well, given the time differential.
He absolutely has, and while he is starting to fall from the pace, it's a big enough cushion where as long as he doesn't make any mistakes, he's in a good spot. And just about everybody, keep in mind, is in a situation where they have that one last tire set if anything was to happen. Also remember this, time could be a factor if we get one more caution flag in this race. Let's take a look at Lane and Adams right now among the fighters. Or Adams and Neeson, I should rather say. This is for 11th and 12th. Richard Regan Jr. has also been fighting hard with these cars all race, or ever since the pit stop mistakes.
Yeah, we see some contact right there. The 23 down on the apron, coming back up the racetrack, just misses the back of Chris Neeson in the 51, and now Regan Jr. is going to have a bit of a run down the backstretch in the 46, but that 46 car has just not looked really good all night, and has looked even worse since the damage.
Yeah, Regan Jr. has not been happy on the radio at times throughout this race, ever since that contact. Still can't get his way on by Brett Adams. Richard Regan Jr. before was running top 10 before that damage. Coming up to 2 to go this upcoming time by. Regan Jr. looking to gain one more position here in what has been a tough one for three-time champion for seasons in PRL competition.
Definitely not the opening round that he would have hoped for here. The switch to open setups, I imagine, probably looked like it was probably going to extend his advantage, not negate it. So I think this is definitely going to finish strong for him.
Yes, absolutely. But for Connor Hall, what a drive and what a race for him. Coming down the back straightaway, coming to the white flag this upcoming time by. It's been a race where it's been domination. He played patiently early on, but ever since he took the lead, he's ran away with it. White flag is out. Lead is already 10 seconds on the final lap from Atlanta.
And he's just been absolutely dominant the second half of the race, and I think, to be honest, he was kind of playing with us a little bit in that first half. I think he had way more pace than he was willing to show at the time. Might have had a little bit of an issue with tape, but just a completely crushing performance, to be honest.
Connor Hall starts off a new era in the Precision Racing League Cup Series with the victory. He wins at Atlanta in dominating fashion. Second place goes to James O'Brien by another 10 seconds. Adam Zemke is going to hold off Luka Zivkov for third position by 5 car lengths, while Joshua Daniels rounds out the top 5. Just wow. Speechless.
Yeah, I definitely think he was hiding something that first half of the race, and once they got it figured out, he was just gone. There was no catching Connor Hall today.
And a good start to the season for Connor Hall, and a lot of drivers to take notes after this one. He'll get the chance to celebrate on the front stretch, as we'll take a step aside. Post-race coverage coming up after this. To the Precision Racing League Cup Series from Atlanta Motor Speedway for post-race coverage and what was a dominant fare on the Global Sim Racing channel tonight. For one Connor Hall, it was one where he put on a clinic and a half in the second half of this one. He wins by more than 10 seconds over James O'Brien. Adam Zemke, Luka Zivkov, Joshua Daniels round out the top 5. 26 seconds back was Mark Halen, while Pat Harvey and Brennan Chatley, along with Charles Sumner, round up the lead lap cars. 10th place, 1 lap down, Colton Lane is that car who finishes in P10.
Chris Neeson comes home in 11th with a good gain from 23rd. It's a 12-spot gain for him. Brett Adams, we saw him having a big fight with Chris Neeson towards the end of the race. He comes off the worst of that and comes home in 12th. Richard Regan Jr. started on the pole and just never really looked comfortable throughout the night. Picked up some damage. Comes home a lap down in 13th. He won't be happy with that. Ken Alonso in 14th behind him, also started inside the top 10 and fell back. With Michael Witt, we had him a solid run to 15th tonight. With David Wilson Jr., we have him picking up some damage early on in 16th. Bisor Jr., with that pit road speed penalty, comes home in 17th alongside another driver who sped on pit road, Bradley Holly. He's 18th. Brandon Walter had some contact with the wall and contact with some other drivers, coming home in 19th. With Mike Knight, first driver, 2 laps down in 20th.
21st spot tonight goes to Chad Brown, 2 laps down as well. Scotty Johnson, 3 laps down after running inside the top 10 at one point, while Trent Dinkle, his debut this season, finishes 23rd. Doug Evans, 3 laps down as well in 24th. Josue Tellez was also in contention for a potential top 15 before he had trouble with the commitment cone and got several penalties. 3 laps down, he's last that grouping 25th. Baron Hilton, 4 laps down, 26th. Craig Holden, 5 laps down in 27th. Patrick Calgill finishing 28th, 6 laps down in this one. 29th goes to James Duke, 16 laps down. And the rest of the field DNF this evening. Michelle Gagnon, Doyle Lawrence, along with James Dewar, Brett Accord. Jose Medina did not start tonight's action. But for Connor Hall, he put on a clinic and then some tonight, especially in the second half of this race. Connor, how does it feel to be a winner in the PRL Cup Series?
Feels pretty good. This is definitely the most I've prepared for an iRacing event. I joined the league through a friend recommending it, and then as soon as I was granted membership, I found out it was going to be an open setup league, which I'm favorable for still. But it definitely took a lot of work, but I'm happy to get it done.
Absolutely, and have to ask with that, did that preparation help you so much for tonight, especially on top of that, having James Mullins, one of the well-respected setup builders on the service, on the box with you?
Yeah, Mr. Mullins and his crew, the guys over at Nexus, they nailed this thing, and it really helped a lot just to have them there to really coach me on how to really drive, how to save some tire for the end, and just some things that I wouldn't necessarily know about iRacing coming in from the real world that now that I've learned made a lot of sense and have helped me be able to capitalize with such a good setup from them. And like I said, just without them, I'd be mid-pack, if not worse than that, most likely. So shout out to them.
Next race after a bye week for the Christmas holidays is Watkins Glen. Your thoughts on going road course racing for the second race?
I'm pretty excited. I started my real life career on the road racing side, so I'd like to think it's a little bit of a discipline of mine, but I definitely know there's going to be some good competition there, and I don't do it as much as I should probably to stay abreast on it, but we'll do the same thing we did this week, put in the time, put in the lap count, and just work beside those guys and try to get it dialed in again for next week.
Indeed. Anyone you want to thank for the race victory tonight?
Yeah, just James Mullins and those guys over there. They really took me under their wing and have helped me get it done. And like I said, they've sped up my learning curve just tremendous. And all credit really goes to them.
Congratulations on what was a dominant victory tonight.
Thank you.
Connor Hall wins by more than 10 seconds. He beats one of the private label team hype cars in James O'Brien by that margin. And we were expecting one of those cars to be quick. It wasn't the matter. The question was rather, which one? We found out which one, Christian.
Yeah, James, that looked like a pretty strong performance. I know this sounds strange to say that, obviously finishing about 10 seconds off the leader, but you were the class of the rest of the field, I have to say. And right from the go, really, you looked the stronger of the pairing of yourselves and Richard Regan Jr. And that was quite interesting to me, because in the fixed side of competition for the last year and the last season, Regan Jr. was the driver who, to be honest, was the one picking up the wins. But it looked like the open setup change to the league has actually been quite favorable for yourself.
Yeah, I've always preferred open. I'm not really ever on a team, so I never get to really practice with it, but we have Reaper setups on board, and that helped out a lot this week. Obviously not enough, but I was pretty happy with it. Did some tweaks on that and made it comfortable for Brandon and I. Richard is on Legacy, so he was running a version of their setup, and I guess it just didn't run the way he wanted it to in traffic or something. It was disappointing. He's still going to be very fast. I'm not really too concerned for him. It was just a growing pains coming from fixed to open. I think I really tried to test as much as I could this week, and I really honestly enjoy the setup side of the service a lot. So I was looking forward to open, and I'm pretty happy with where we finished, especially behind Connor, who's, I know, a good driver in real life. So pretty happy with second.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely looked like you kind of had everybody else beat. And I mean, one thing that you didn't kind of fall prey to that we saw a lot of drivers suffer with was the pit road speed penalty.
Oh yeah, I was wondering what happened. pretty much rebuilt my whole computer and rig in the off season, so I was kind of working buttons out, and I had relative, but I couldn't scroll or anything, so I was like asking Brandon and Richard, what's going on? Where is everybody? Why is Adam Zemke in third? Because he was in like ninth before pits, and they told me that like 8 people got speeding penalties or something. I'm not too sure. That's crazy though. I was very close. I hit pit road, I think, right on the dot.
Yeah, a lot of guys were struggling with the pit road speed there. It just it looked like it was one of those things where everybody had spent a ton of time working on their setups, but
Yep.
everybody forgot that you still have to do the same things you have to do in every other race. One of them is getting down on a pit road, but definitely a good run for yourself. And next week there's a bye week, so no racing. But then we're coming back to Watkins Glen, and obviously road course. How do you feel about that one?
I like road courses. My finishes haven't been as like flashy as they used to be, but I mean I'm usually top 5 when we go there. I used to be one of the ringers per se, but there's a lot of good drivers in the field now, so I'll take what I can get. Watkins is probably one of my favorite tracks in real life too, and on the service, I really enjoy running there, and I think we'll be starting the setup build there probably in the next couple of days, and try to prepare for 2 weeks this time.
That definitely sounds a good plan, and obviously you got a little bit of a gap to close down to Connor, but still a good result today for the second, a good way to start the new season. And before we let you go, is there anybody that you'd like to give a shout out to or thanks to?
Yeah, my teammates Brandon and Richard for helping build and like brainstorm on setups. It's going to be a whole new ball game this year, so we got to really be together and work together and plan and build. Obviously, we have like 2 new sponsors on board this year. We got Private Label as our title sponsor and Ethica running on board too, and they both make some really cool stuff. Their travel bags at Private Label are really, really cool, and Ethica makes like pretty much any clothing you could think of. And then I got a Moto Million for motorcycle parts, and not on the car, but my friend's business, Road Trip Transport, still going strong out there. Oh, and you guys for putting this on like usual.
Well, I definitely appreciate you coming and chatting with us. And once again, congrats on the second place finish, and good luck for next time out at Watkins Glen.
Thanks, Christian. Hopefully I'll talk to you then too.
Hope so.
Once again, James O'Brien coming home in second. Adam Zemke comes home in third with a bit of strategy on top of things. Adam, how does it feel to finish in third to start off the season?
I really couldn't be too much happier to start this whole season out with a finish like this. I'm pretty happy about that. As far as like strategy goes, I think really the only strategy that worked for me was just minimizing mistakes. I really didn't make too many. It seems like a bunch of cars in front of us either had run-ins with other drivers or had pit road mistakes or something. So I was just able to avoid that and kind of walk into a third place finish.
With an undercut on top of it by 7 to 8 laps from some of your competitors, but as well, what was kind of like the preparation like and the thought process like on how you wanted to break down this race and build this car for this week?
I'm not into the building too much just because I'm a little ignorant on how some of the setup stuff works. We used a Rocket Racing setup this week, and I think them because that's seemed to be a pretty stable car. We messed around with a couple setups, and a lot of them were really loose. And this car was a little loose too, but it was a little bit more stable in the long runs. And then just putting the laps in, I did a couple races throughout the week, and was just able to keep my car clean, really above anything.
On that note, then, Watkins Glen is the next race. Your thoughts on going there?
I really do like road racing. Well, one of the things I do like about it is just I'm able to stay consistent most of the time, and because there's no cautions there, I'm gonna allow people to make mistakes, and hopefully they'll give me a few positions. I'm not the fastest road racer by any means, but I think I'm pretty consistent. I think that helps out quite a bit at a racetrack that we don't have cautions.
Indeed. Anyone you want to thank for the run?
Yeah, I want to thank PRL for setting this all up. I want to thank my team car Ramrod for helping us walk through the race here. I'd like to thank GSRC. You guys always rock. Your broadcasts are pretty awesome. I'd like to thank Web Hearing Center for sponsoring us this season. I think that's it.
Congratulations on the run tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Congratulations again to Adam Zemke on third. I'd like to thank him, James O'Brien, and Connor Hall for taking the time to speak with us during post-race coverage today. Now, Christian, Your thoughts on this one and how these drivers could try and build momentum or try and rebound for Watkins Glen in a couple weeks?
Well, I think obviously totally different circuit, totally different ethos in terms of setup building, totally different downforce and engine power package as well. So there's really very little that's going to transfer across. But I think the one thing that was very clear tonight, with the sheer number of pit road speeding penalties that we saw, is that even though it's open setup and the setup does make a big difference, the one thing that you can't ever forget is race preparation, and especially for a road course such as Watkins Glen, you got to keep on top of the pit stops. You got to get an idea of what you're going to do for a green flag stop, how you're going to execute that stop, and you don't want to lose time in kind of silly ways, like obviously we saw drivers tonight getting the pit road speeding penalty. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. The other thing is it's going to take a lot to catch Connor Hall. I think obviously that's a big difference to kind of close down, and he said he was going to be very comfortable when it came to racing. So I think these guys have got the work cut out for them, but it's definitely interesting to see a new face in the PRL league and taking the fight to kind of the old hands now, which is Richard Regan Jr. and Bradley Holly.
Absolutely. We'd like to thank you on that note for tuning into tonight's exciting action here from Atlanta Motor Speedway. I'd also like to thank Charles Sumner and the rest of the Precision Racing League for organizing this strong series, as well as the title sponsors for 2021 Season 1, SimMSA, Butt Kicker, along with NinjaTrader. We'd also like to thank the following companies that provide the software and hardware for our broadcast listed now up on screen. Special thanks go to Jude Law, and provides her wonderful music. See the screen for how to get a hold of her great work. Thanks to the team tonight, and Christian and Sean. If you'd like to find out more about GSRC, including upcoming races, you can find it at globalsimracingchannel.com. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check the merchandise for sale at gsrc.storyvy.com, or you can check our social media on Twitter at GSR Channel, along with Facebook at Global Sim Racing Channel, and Instagram at GSRC_Graham. Head on to the YouTube page and hit that big red subscribe button, as well as the notification bell, so you don't miss a moment. Global Sim Racing Channel. As talked about, the next race for this series heads over to Watkins Glen on Sunday, January 3rd, as these drivers look to try and conquer the Glen. The question is, which driver will come away with the race victory, and who will catch up to Connor Horn after a dominant start to this one in the points? We'll find out come next Sunday, January the 3rd in the new year. We also have upcoming races for other series listed up on the screen, so be sure to check those out as well and mark them down your calendar. Until next time, race clean, race hard, and we'll see you at the track.